In Parliament today, Minister in charge of the Smart Nation Initiative, Dr Vivian Balakrishnan, addressed the privacy concerns surrounding TraceTogether. This following yesterday's parliamentary sitting when MP Desmond Tan said that the Singapore Police Force has access to the TraceTogether data for criminal investigations.
TraceTogether only collects Bluetooth proximity data on a temporary basis. It does not collect, and I want to emphasize, it does not collect GPS location data nor movement data. The app or the token only keeps a temporary record of who you have come into close contact with for a prolonged basis. Neither the app nor the token tracks a user's location. The data is then stored in an encrypted form locally on your device. That means either your phone or the token. And that data, that encrypted data, is automatically purged after 25 days.
Well, Leader of the Opposition, Pritam Singh, asked for examples of when TraceTogether data will be used by the police. And in response, Home Affairs and Law Minister K. Shanmugam explained that although Section 20 of the Criminal Procedure Code allows for the police to obtain this data, they will only do it in serious criminal investigations.
To give you an example, let's say there is a murder and victim's family, and information is available on the TraceTogether token. If police chose not to seek that information, you can imagine how the victim's family and indeed the rest of Singapore might react to that situation. The police approach has been and will be that it's pretty much restricted to very serious offenses. While that requirement is not in the legislation, it will be carefully considered within the police, and discretion will be exercised in seeking this information.
Well, and Workers' Party MP Jaul Giam also asked Dr. Balakrishnan, if the government had considered the impact on the public's adoption of TraceTogether. Dr. Balakrishnan replied that he will maintain the approach of helping the public understand the reasons behind these measures as opposed to enforcing mandatory rules.
I believe that our victory over this pandemic is not by us sitting up here and issuing rules and edicts, but that our people must understand not only the measures that we're implementing, but why we're implementing it, the spirit behind it, so that with their understanding and voluntary and full cooperation, we can achieve success. And it is in that spirit, therefore, that we have these open discussions, and why I remain confident that the participation rate in contact tracing, using the latest tools that we have available, will remain high, and why I hope we will continue to be one of the bright spots in the world.
Well, Singapore editor for the Straits Times, Zakir Hussain, joins me now to take this topic further. Before we talk more about what Dr. Balakrishnan said today, Zak, perhaps we can first take a step back. Can you help us unpack the issues that were raised following what Desmond Tan said in Parliament yesterday?
So I think 24 hours ago, many of our viewers and readers were caught by surprise that Minister of State Desmond Tan publicly acknowledged, I think it was the first acknowledgement by a government official, that the police will be able to tap on TraceTogether data for investigations. And I think many sort of reacted quite in a surprised manner, because I think they looked back at previous assurances that this data would be used largely or primarily for contact tracing purposes, and there were all these assurances about privacy and so on. And I think there was a bit of, as leader of the opposition, Pritam Singh noted, I think consternation on the ground. And I think this was probably why the Minister in charge of Smart Nation, Vivian Balakrishnan, decided they had to come out in Parliament today and basically try to set the record straight.
Right.
And I think what was interesting was the couple of points he made. I think he gave the assurances that there was always this conscious need to protect privacy, and the safeguards were inbuilt in the TraceTogether tokens. You know, data would be expunged for after 25 days, and it only captures proximity data, not location data. The other point is that actually the law, the Criminal Procedure Code, has always allowed the police fairly broad latitude to investigate in the event of a serious offense, and whether it's banking secrecy laws or privacy laws, in this case, your TraceTogether data as well, there's been latitude for the police to act and to investigate.
We were talking off air before the show that you don't think that what Desmond Tan said yesterday is contrary to anything that the ministers had said before about TraceTogether, right?
Yeah, I think, in every case, although data is meant to be used and there are all these privacy safeguards and regulations, in the event of a serious crime or offense, say a murder or, a potentially grave robbery, I think if there is sufficient room for the police to investigate, as I think the Home Affairs Minister Shanmugam noted earlier, if police did not use these powers to pursue justice, I think there would be an uproar. I think what was telling was during the debate today, Minister Vivian hinted slightly about, that maybe they did consider, they did think about whether they should have, some of these provisions to maybe exempt TraceTogether data from being looked at. We're not sure how these discussions went or how they might resurface in future. But I think the bigger picture is there has always been latitude for law enforcement to override, if you would, some of these privacy laws in the larger interest.
Right.
And I think most Singaporeans, after, in spite of the initial reactions, I think the majority of Singaporeans will not mind giving up some of these, privacy rights, I'd say.
Then what do you make of what Dr. Balakrishnan and Mr. Shanmugam said today? Do you think their clarifications were adequate enough, comprehensive enough to address privacy concerns?
I think, for MPs, they probably were. But I think people out there aren't going to be reassured. I think this is an issue that is going to need constant explanation time and again. And I think what was striking for me was you had both the leader of the opposition, Pritam Singh, and alternate GRC MP Gerald Yam, I think, both come out and say that, everybody wants TraceTogether to succeed. Gerald Yam even said he'd gone out to convince people to use the token. And he wanted to put on record that he supported the system, and I think it's important to ensure that these safeguards are robust enough and in place. And I think this debate will continue.
Okay. Well, on the public's point of view, we learned yesterday that 78% of the population are using TraceTogether. That's more than 4.2 million people. But like you said earlier, it may take some time for the public to get over this matter, I guess.
Yeah.
So do you think that 78% is the peak of TraceTogether adoption that we're going to see?
I'm not sure. I think TraceTogether safe entry or TraceTogether check-ins are not mandatory yet at places until everyone's is able to collect their token. But if, say, schools or public malls or buildings were to mandate TraceTogether check-ins, I think you might get a higher adoption rate. 78% is pretty good. I think if you look elsewhere in the world, there have always been concerns about privacy and security. It's hard to say. I think you might get a minority who choose to opt out, and maybe they might not want to visit malls at all. But I think adoption, I'm quite confident. I think the adoption rate will probably rise a little more.